Thank you, Charlie, for accepting my invitation to be on the We Need Act. I'm really excited to have you here. To start, I would like to touch on your background in zoology, biology, and conservation. And I would like to hear your thoughts on how we are currently addressing climate change and biodiversity loss. These issues are often treated as separated crises, even though they are deeply interconnected. In your view, are we doing enough to tackle them in a unified way?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We do see the destruction of the natural world and the heating of the planet as completely separate issues, and we approach them in the way we talk about them, the way we try to find solutions. We always or very often treat them separately. But of course, they're completely interconnected. They're interconnected because we can't conserve the natural world without addressing climate change. Climate change is so serious now that it's becoming the greatest threat to nature, and even greater threat than deforestation and other direct threats. At the same time, we can't address climate change without conserving nature, because nature is such a big store of carbon. So it is a problem that we address them separately. I think part of this is it's just an issue of complexity, really. Our planetary system is so complex, and our approaches to dealing with them, our social and political and economic and cultural responses to these problems are so complex that there's just always a natural temptation to simplify things, to put things into a smaller box, because if there's a small, if we can limit the parameters around our problem, then it becomes easier to deal with. It is unfortunately a problem because it limits the solutions that are available to us. And I think it's a particular problem with the focus on climate change. So climate change is, in a way, it's a much simpler story than the destruction of nature, because you can measure it with simple numbers. You can measure it in temperature, or you can measure it in parts per million. And with nature, we can't do that. But this focus on temperature and carbon is really problematic, I think, because it makes us dismiss all the other impacts that we have on the natural world. And so I think electric vehicles are a great example of this, right? So we know that road transportation is a huge contributor to climate change, so we need to address that. And the most widely promoted solution to the problem of emissions from cars is electric cars, because electric cars, they reduce the emissions, and they also reduce the air pollution. But the thing is, emissions and air pollution are just one very, very small part of the problems with cars. Cars kill people. Cars kill billions of animals every year, wild animals, insects, plants, mammals. Roads disrupt natural habitats, and they stop connectivity. Cars create lots of pollution from tires, and this is the pollution from tires is a big cause of microplastic pollution in rivers and in the ocean. Cars destroy our cities and our communities, and they make our neighborhoods unattractive places to be, because the streets are dangerous and smelly and loud. So, cars have dozens of environmental and social impacts. But when we think only in terms of climate change, when we think only in terms of carbon emissions, then electric vehicles sound like an answer. But it's a problem of carbon tunnel vision. When we look only at emissions, we forget all the other problems we have. And I think this is a real problem with, it's great that there is focus on climate change, but climate change and emissions is just one element of a huge polycrisis, and it's dangerous whenever our attention is diverted away from the complexity of a multi-pronged polycrisis. Then that's dangerous, I think.
Well, you brought up a lot of important points, and humans are naturally wired to think in systems. We tend to simplify and focus on one aspect at a time, even though everything is interconnected. This complexity in sustainability is often described as a wicked problem, one without a clear solution. Still, we must look at the whole picture to grasp how deeply interdependent things are. Conservation and restoration are key to addressing biodiversity loss. So, what concrete actions are needed, and why aren't we doing enough already?
Big questions. Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. I think there's a lot of reasons why we don't conserve the natural world. Um, for a long time throughout our evolution and history, the natural world has essentially seemed limitless. It's been difficult to imagine until very recently that we could have genuine impacts on it. And for a long time through our cultural evolution over the last thousands of years, we have depended on the exploitation of natural resources to develop our economies and stuff. But we've never developed a system where we actually value the natural resources that we have. Economy doesn't value natural resources until they are exploited. So you have a tree, for example. Imagine a tree, a 200-year-old tree in a forest. This tree is doing wonderful things for society. It's absorbing carbon, it's oxygen, it's preventing flooding, it's adding fertility to the soil, it's providing a home for insects and plants and all sorts of creatures. So this, and it's giving us joy. It makes us happy that this tree is here, right? So it provides all these things that are wonderful and valuable for society, but there is no financial benefit from those things. The only financial benefit arrives when somebody comes to cut down the tree and sell it for wood. But even though, if we picture our economy as a whole, then cutting down that tree might be a very bad thing, because maybe you get $100 from selling the wood, but you've lost $500 worth of flood prevention services and joy to people and biodiversity conservation services. However, that $500 of value that the tree is giving never makes it to an actual market. The only marketable value is the $100 you get from cutting it down. So there's always the incentive there for one person to cut down the tree, even if it means everyone loses. So ultimately, I think our problem is an economy that has so many externalities. The values of things aren't internalized into the value that we give them. Another issue, I think, is one of emotional disconnect from nature. Many people in industrialized societies, we live far from nature. We don't interact with it, and it means we don't build a relationship with it. We don't bond with it. There's less love, and I think positive emotions, connection, and love are such powerful motivations for society in what we prioritize. In terms of, so another reason I think actually that many people in society don't value the natural world as much as we like, I think actually stems partially from the way that environmentalists and conservationists have talked about the natural world all this time. So for a long time, we've been trying to persuade everybody to conserve other species. And we want to conserve other species because other species are wonderful and they have a right to exist just like we do, and we have a responsibility to care for them. But when we say that conserving the environment is all about tigers and dolphins and pandas, and we're saying we are doing it for them, this is an altruistic, it's a nice thing that we are doing for these other animals, but that makes it seem, yes, other animals are important, but that makes it seem like the environment is much, much less important than it is. In reality, conserving nature is much more important than conserving dolphins and tigers for most people, because it's conserving us. It's giving us it's conserving the life support system that we depend on. And I really think there's a problem with messaging there because when we say conservation is for the tigers and the pandas, what we are saying is that nature is just the cherry on top of the cake. It's just, it's just an extra nice thing to have. But nature is not the cherry on top of the cake. Nature is the baker. And so there's a problem with our messaging there. In terms of, sorry, this has been a long answer already, but the first part of your question is what do we need to do? I could talk about this for 2 days, but I just want to make one little point, because there's been a huge emphasis throughout our societies in the last few years on planting trees. And a lot of people, I think that the most important thing we need to do to conserve nature is to plant trees. And there's good reasons why we like to plant trees. It makes us feel like we're doing something. It's visible, but ultimately you cannot create a forest. Even 200 one-year-old trees cannot replace one 200-year-old tree, because the only way to replace a 200-year-old tree is to wait 200 years. There's no other way. There are species of moss and lichen that will only grow on a 200-year-old tree. I think our focus on planting trees is really misguided, because what is much, much more important is to conserve the ecosystems that we already have. And, we don't have much money in environmentalism. We don't have much capacity. And I think the more we focus on trying to create new forests, the more our attention is diverted from conserving the forests and other habitats we already have. But there is nothing as important as conserving what we already have. So I think restoration is important, but we need to stop the destruction first.
Great answer. Thank you. It's difficult to put a price on nature. And that's part of why, under the current capitalist system, we fail to give nature the value it deserves. Well, one point you raised that is especially relevant is messaging, how we frame these issues. We often present ourselves as heroes trying to save the planet, but what's truly at stake is our survival. We must start weaving the interdependence between humans and nature into the broader narrative. From a social and behavioral perspective, how can we encourage people to care more about the issues facing our planet?
And you sort of answered your own question, actually. In the question you said, how can we better connect people to these issues? And that's why we're failing, because most of the time in our communications, we don't actually try to connect people with these issues. We tell them information, and that's it, because we think that if we just give the facts, that will be enough. So we say, if we don't do this, there's no future for polar bears. And then we just expect people to start acting. But people don't have a personal connection with polar bears, so that's not the way to get people to act. I think we need, the first thing is to understand that people don't react to information. This is not what drives our decision making. If that was the case, then there'd be no such thing as obese people or smokers or anything. We're primarily emotional creatures rather than rational creatures, and I'm sure all our listeners will understand this. Sometimes you can try and make a decision. You can spend a long time writing a list of pros and cons, and in the end you just do what you feel like doing because that's what you want to do. And yet we think that we can persuade people by just giving them facts. And what's worse is that often the concepts we're talking about are really distant and abstract, so they don't seem real. And climate change is a great example of this. It's an invisible gas that's causing it. It's happening, in the atmosphere. It's with crazy chemistry and physics that we don't understand. We talk about it in abstract numbers: 1.5, 2 degrees, 420 parts per million. This doesn't mean anything to anybody. And we always talk about it as a distant problem. It will We don't say how it will affect you. We say how it will affect polar bears. And, to this day, so it's 2025. There are people dying all over the world because of extreme weather events. And to this day, you still hear environmentalists saying, we need to do something for our grandchildren. Like, what? Grandchildren? This is happening now. But we're talking about it in a way that makes it seem distant. So what we need to do always, I think, is lessen the psychological distance between us or between the people we're speaking to and the problem. And the way to do that, I think the first thing we need to do, so there's lots of tips, tell stories instead of using facts. Focus on emotion, focus on good news stories instead of just the bad news stories. Don't just talk about the bad stuff that will happen if we don't do things, but talk about the good stuff that will happen if we do things. But for me, the most important thing we can do is not talk at all. It's listen. And that's really difficult for us because we are environmental communicators. We have information that is really important that we want to share with people. But the thing is, everybody has already heard this information. They know already. Right? So if they are not already doing something about it, if they are not already treating these crises seriously in their personal lives, it's not because they didn't have the information. It's because they have some psychological barrier. They have told themselves some story about why this issue is not for them. Why they don't have to act. Maybe it's because it's an identity thing. They think this is just for environmentalists or just for hippies or just for left-wing people. But, that's not me, so I don't want to do this. Perhaps, maybe they don't like some of the solutions. Maybe for some reason they just hate wind farms or whatever. Maybe they think that that someone else is going to fix the problem. Maybe they think that maybe they want to be a climate activist, but they think they are not welcome because they still eat some meat sometimes or something. The point is, we won't be able to know what is the barrier that's holding them back. What is the story they're telling themselves unless we listen. And, no amount of facts about polar bears will change their mind if the thing that's holding them back is something about their political identity. Yeah. So I've already talked a bit about how I think we focus too much on other species. And this is a big issue in the UK at the moment because the UK government, so we have laws that limit development of land because of the environmental impact. So, if you want to build a new house or a new road and it will be devastating for biodiversity, the law limits you from doing that. The government is trying to remove some of these protections from nature, and they are using a narrative that is trying to say that other species aren't important. They are saying we need houses in this country, we need roads, we shouldn't stop building just to protect some newts and bats. Newts and bats aren't important, houses are more important. But they've focused the narrative on newts and bats because these are not popular species and they don't seem important. But the thing is, it's not just newts and bats that are being defended. It's the life support systems that nature provides us with. And I think we need to talk about us and our survival. And I think we need to talk about nature as a life support system, not just habitat for other species. I think also we should focus on. It's difficult because nature is something that is very useful to us. It is vital to us. We can't live without it. But it's also something that we love and that many people love. And of course, different people respond to different messaging. Different people respond to different emotions. And I think we need to rethink our messaging based on who we're speaking to. So, some people do really value nature because they love other species. You and I do, and all of your listeners here love nature, I'm sure. But we are actually just a small portion of society, and most people don't make nature a significant factor in their lives, in their shopping decisions or their voting decisions or their investment decisions. Nature doesn't really feature. I talked before about how it's quite important to increase the understanding of the economic value of nature, because most of our world, our decision makers, our governments, our private sector investors, they make decisions based on financial things. So I talked about making the $500 worth of values that a tree creates, making that visible, because saying $500 is the language of decision makers. But that's also a risk, because for other people who love nature, if you reduce a beautiful, wondrous, magnificent tree to $500, maybe actually you're reducing the value. By putting a number on it, you're taking away the love and the wonder and all these things. So for some people, speaking the language of economics is less motivating to protect nature. So there is no magic way to help people feel the value, I think. But building connection, and just with everything, I think it's whenever we talk about communications and how to communicate better, the most powerful form of communication is a rich, ongoing, one-to-one conversation where you understand each other and understand each other's values. And unfortunately, that's a form of communication that is becoming less and less influential in our society. More and more our communications happen digitally and just through social media and stuff. But that's not the most powerful way to persuade people, is to speak to them and listen to them.
Yes, and as you said, sustainability is context dependent. Each person values different aspects based on their specific needs and realities. That's why it's so important to have one-on-one conversations and to truly understand the perspectives of the people we are engaging with. To be honest, I'm worried. In recent months, we have seen significant setbacks with climate misinformation on the rise and denial gaining traction. From your perspective as a researcher, how can we strengthen the connection between science, politics, the corporate world, and society at large?
This is the key question. This is such a key question, isn't it? And I think a lot of people are asking themselves this in the times we find ourselves in 2025. Science is under attack and evidence-based decision making is under attack. And I think we have a problem. The scientific community and the broader community of good people, the 99% of us across society that believe in a healthy environment and believe in social justice and want the world to be a better place, we have been complacent and we've been very passive. In the scientific community in particular, we've had this assumption that our ideas will win because they're the best ideas. They're based on truth, they're based on reality, and that is enough for our ideas to lead to change. And we've seen this with climate scientists and environmental scientists for decades and decades and decades. We thought it's okay, it's enough just to produce the data and ring the alarm. If we produce the data and we give it to our decision makers, they will use the information to make the right decisions. But that is naive, because it's not a level playing field. We haven't recognized that there are powerful forces that do not want the change that we require. So what the scientific community has been saying for decades is we need to change everything. We need to completely revolutionize our economy. But of course, there are winners in our economy now, and they want to keep the economy as it is because they are winning. So that's, most obviously that's fossil fuel companies. But on top of that, agribusinesses, agrochemicals, big beef, motoring, aviation, construction, mining, tourism, big tech, data centers, just all of these sectors rely on freedom to continue doing what they do, which is to destroy the environment for profit. And the only way they can continue to do that is if they work to prevent government legislation on environment and climate. So for as long as we've been producing the science, they have been working to prevent the science leading to change. And they've done that in two main ways, by corrupting politics through donations and lobbying, and by poisoning the public mind, by creating a disinformation campaign, by working to make people not trust science. And this is, it's bigger than ever now. So I think what we need to do, not just the scientific community, but everyone that believes in evidence-based decision-making, we need to stop being passive. We need to stop being passive and just assume that we will win because we are right. We have to understand that we have opponents, and they are powerful and they fight dirty, unlike us. And the only way to counter them, I think, is to build a power of our own. Counter them with people power, to counter the financial power of these elites. So I'm a big believer in social movements, in collective action, people coming together in social movements. But I believe that whether able to join a social movement or not, I think that we can all make a difference by just making a mental shift from being passive bystanders to being active change makers. And that doesn't have to involve a huge amount, even starting conversations when you don't normally start conversations. So, we have all the data from all the polling and stuff, and we know that 70 or 80% of people really worry about climate change, but maybe 10% of people talk about climate change. So there we have 60 or 70% of people who are worried about it, but don't talk about it. So if those people simply started conversations at the bus stop, at work, with your friends, with your family, then that makes a huge difference, because we start to normalize talking about it. And this for me is the most important things we can do, is to start normalizing talking and caring and acting, because we don't do it. So there's really interesting research that shows, there was a study 2 years ago in the United States. It asked people how much they support climate policies. And everybody says, yes, I love climate policies. And then they asked them how much you think other people support climate policies. And they said, no, I don't think other people support them very much. So what that showed is, people that care about climate and support climate policies, we are the majority, but we think that we are a minority because we don't speak about it. And that becomes a self-reinforcing silence. We think that other people don't want to talk about this, so we don't, because we think it's just me, so we don't talk about it. But that creates a culture of silence. And the culture of silence is really, really important, because it makes us think that the issue isn't important. Because we're social animals, and we get a lot of our information about what's important from other people, not from the news, not from what we read, but from the social signals we get from other people. So there's some really, really interesting research. I love this story of a psychology experiment that was carried out in the 1960s. The psychologist asked some students to come to a meeting, and then they placed them in a waiting room and asked them to fill out a form. And while they were doing that, they started pumping smoke under the doors of the waiting room, right? So when they did that, almost all of the students, when they were alone in the waiting room, they noticed the smoke, and almost all of them, within 2 minutes, they got up to find someone to warn them about the danger. Yeah. So then they repeated the experiment with actors, and the actors were told to notice the smoke and then just carry on filling out the form. And when this happened, the experimental participants, they noticed the smoke, and then they look around them and they think, nobody else is doing something. Maybe these people know something that I don't. Maybe they know it's just a drill and I don't know. And of course, I don't want to risk embarrassing myself by getting up and saying something if it's not important. So when this happened, the students would sit there for up to 20 minutes while the room filled with smoke, just because nobody else was acting as if it's serious. And this is the exact situation we find ourselves in society. You wake up in the morning, you look at the news, and you hear about this extreme weather. You read some scientists' warning, and you think, oh, this sounds serious. And then you walk out and you start walking to work. Everything's normal. Nobody's doing anything. You get to work. Nobody's saying anything about that scientist warning I read. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I misinterpreted these. Surely, if this was real, people would be doing something, right? People would be talking about this, but they're not. So we're in this crazy situation in society where nobody is treating this seriously simply because nobody else is treating it seriously. And that's a crazy situation, but it gives us immense power as individuals. We have huge power because all we have to do is start treating it seriously. And that sends the signal to other people that this is serious. And it catches on. It's social contagion. Social contagion is the most powerful social force there is. It's, that's why we have crazy fashions in ripped jeans and stuff, because of social contagion. And what we need now is to stimulate the social contagion of caring about this and being active, because when we do that, it allows other people to do it too.
Yes, and it helps build community, which is so important. I've heard from several guests that when they started caring about the planet, they felt alone. But once they began talking to others, they realized they weren't the only ones who cared. From there, they started building a community of like-minded people working on the same issues. How would you advise someone to begin that journey? Where should they start, and why is it important to take that first step?
Great question. I think we all need to ask ourselves this. I think part of the problem is, so up till now, we've always been trying to persuade people to act by saying, it's urgent, do something. It's really important, do something. But it's not enough to just say do something if people don't know what to do. And this is part of the problem, I think, is that people don't know what to do. Almost all the advice available, you can easily find a blog saying 10 things you can do about climate change, but almost all of that is about your personal carbon footprint. And yes, it's important that we address our own impacts, and everybody does want to address their own impacts, but people also know that it's not enough. And it feels when you're saying it's my fault, when the oil companies and the beef companies are just doing what they want. And also it just doesn't feel enough. You're saying it's a big global emergency, everything needs to change, but then you're telling me that the only thing I can do is take the bus. It doesn't make sense. So there's a real problem with only focusing on footprints. But then the only other alternative that people see is when they turn on the news and they see that you can go and get arrested blocking a road, and, for whatever reason, that doesn't appeal to them either. Personally, it's something that I believe in and something that I've engaged in, but of course I understand that most people can't or don't want to do that. The problem so when we think about footprints or political activism, we're talking about whether change happens from the grassroots, change happen from below, or change happen from above, from the government. But the problem with thinking about from above and below is that it misses out everything that's in the middle. And in the middle is everything. When the government says that we need to decarbonize our society by 2050, that means every school, every university, every shop, every office, every factory, every gardening company, every sports club, every neighborhood, every street, every community, every block of flats has to completely transform. And somebody has to catalyze that process. We can't just wait for directors and governments and councils to do this. Quite often, it needs somebody to just start it. And I think that shows that there really is something for everybody to do, because everybody lives in some form of, everybody lives in a place. And that place needs to change. Everybody is a member of institutions. If it's your workplace, the clubs you're part of, where you study, your children's school, all these institutions need to start changing. And quite often there is somebody at the top of these institutions responsible. They know they have to transform their institution, but they don't know what to do. They need help. And that's something that all of us can get involved in. So I think the most important thing is to think about where you have an influence as an individual, and to focus on that. There is, all of us have different circles of influence because we know different people. All of us have different skills and experiences, and all of us have different interests and things we love. And so I think it's about finding how we can do the things we love in a way that is influential. So for example, I don't know, if you're an artist or a website builder and you believe in the work of Extinction Rebellion, but you don't want to get arrested, then don't get arrested. Help build the websites for Extinction Rebellion, or join the arts group to make banners. But, you can use your skills to support these groups in ways that you find interesting. Or if you don't, then, if you don't want to work for an activist group, change your children's school, but do it in a way, this doesn't mean having to learn new skills or do difficult things. Use the skills you already have and find where they are needed in our society's transition. The reason why doing that is important, it's not just that, well, of course it's important because if you don't do it, it won't get done, and it needs to get done. We can't all just sit back and wait for somebody else to do it. It's an emergency. We need to do it ourselves. But the reason why it's important is that it's what I was saying before. It's not the direct impact only of our actions. It's the signal that it sends to other people that this is important. And when we send those signals, that inspires other people too. So sociologists talk about how we need to reach social tipping points, which is the point at which so many people are doing something or pushing for change that it becomes adopted by the whole society and change becomes inevitable. And I firmly believe that we will properly start to embark on a sustainability transition when we reach social tipping points. So I think of everything I do in terms of social contagion and helping build momentum towards social tipping points. And that's really inspiring to me. It's really motivating to me because it makes me see that I don't have to change the world. I just have to inspire a few people next to me, and then they inspire the people next to them. And I love the thought of, it's a really powerful thought, and I love the thought of dancing. So, because this is a great example of social contagions. Imagine yourself at a party or a festival or something, and you're having a wonderful time, there's nice music, you've had a drink or something, and you want to dance, but nobody is dancing. So of course you're probably not going to get up and dance. Soon somebody starts to dance and you want to join them, but they're a much better dancer than you, or worse, they're a bit weird. They have crazy stuff in their hair and a big skirt, and you don't want to join the crazy dancer. So you stand back. Soon a couple of other people join the dancer and that changes the ambiance completely. People feel the safety in numbers and they all start to join the dance floor. At this point, if the atmosphere is really good, an amazing thing can happen. You reach a social tipping point where so many people are dancing now that it becomes the norm. And even the people that didn't want to dance, they are drawn in. Now they feel they're missing out on something, or they feel that, they feel like a plum standing at the back looking grumpy. So they join in. And it just shows how our behavior influences other people and how it catches on. And the key thing here is the power of the second and third dancers, because they normalize the weirdo and they validate the weirdo. And at the moment, caring about climate change makes you the weird, crazy dancer. But when people who aren't environmentalists, when people start talking about climate change, when they're speaking to the other parents outside the school waiting for their children, or they start speaking about it at work, or they start making initiatives in their street, you are the second and third dancer and you validate the Extinction Rebellion and the scientists. So you don't have to be the first answer, but by validating the scientists and the activists, we normalize them. And so when we step out and we say, those guys are right, they are right, and we should listen to them, it's important. That's hugely, hugely powerful. So that's why it's so important, because if, social contagion, we cannot avoid social contagion. If we are not active, then we are spreading passivity. If we are not talking about it, then we are saying it's okay not to talk about it. It's okay to do it. So we cannot avoid the social influence we have. But if the knowledgeable people, the environmentalists, aren't visibly acting, then that sends negative social signals instead of positive social signals. But yeah, I find it very hopeful, because if you get a plant-based burger in a restaurant, then yes, you saved 8 kilograms of carbon dioxide and 1,000 liters of water and all of this. That is the direct impact. But the indirect impact for the people you're eating with, for the restaurant, for the people in the table next to you, is you have helped normalize plant-based eating. You've helped normalize caring, and we don't know what impact that will have on the people next to us. So the impact is potentially limitless. And I find that hugely empowering and motivating and uplifting.
This has been a truly enlightening conversation, and I'm grateful to have your knowledge and experience shared on this podcast. Before we wrap up, is there a final message you would like to leave with our listeners?
Well, just to reiterate what I was saying before, you are a powerful social agent. Sorry to use that. I need to find a better word, but you are a powerful influential person. If you are not going to do these things, who is? So do. And as Sarah said earlier, it's not just about doing these things because we need them to happen. It's also the best thing you could do for yourself in terms of mental health, I think. We all sit at home worrying, terrified, but a big part of the mental health issues we suffer is because we feel powerless and because we feel alone. When you start doing something, you're no longer alone because you will be with other people, and you're no longer powerless because suddenly you are taking back a little bit of control. So yeah, if you're worried, if you're scared, if you're sad, honestly, the best thing you can do, join a group, take back control.
Yeah, let's normalize being the weirdo. Thank you so much, Charlie, for deepening our understanding and raising so many important questions. I hope we can welcome you back in a future episode.
I look forward to that very much. Thank you so much.